This is Layla. She's a wonderful little kitten who graced me with her presence recently. Sometime last month, I had been out for a walk, and as I was coming back to my house, I found this little fluff ball beside the road. She was pretty zonked out, but I confirmed she was warm and breathing, and just really looked like she needed a safe place to go. So I wasn't sure what else to do but to pick her up and carry her back to my house. So that's what I did. Once we got there, she seemed aware that she had entered a different environment. Her eyes were all kind of stuck shut the way kittens' eyes often are, all goopy and kind of gross, so she couldn't really see anything. She started perking up just a little bit once she was in a quieter environment. I gave her some water right away because I've heard that animals found in the wild are often very thirsty and dehydrated. She drank that right away. While that happened, I prepared a warm washcloth and wiped off her eyes a little bit, and after I worked at them for a little while, I managed to get her sight back so she could see what was going on. Didn't have like any cat food around or anything, so I looked for something appropriate to feed her. I gave her a little bit of lunch meat just so she'd have something in her stomach. And at this point it was pretty late at night, so I just kind of put some folded towels in my bathtub, which was about the best place I felt like I could contain her, and went to bed with plans to do lots of stuff in the morning. Again, she was very tired and sleepy and, not looking super great, but there was only so much I could do for her at that point. So first thing in the morning, as soon as the closest store opened, I bought some kitten food and gave it to her, and she was pretty hungry at that point, so she ate it right up. A couple of hours later, closest pet supply store opened, so I went there and decided I needed to get some supplies for her if I was going to have her around. I was just kind of doing what came naturally. It's like, okay, there's a little kitten who really needs my help. I brought her into my house. She needs some supplies. Wasn't thinking too far ahead. So I got a cat bed, a litter box, a scratching post, some food and water dishes, some cleaning supplies, basic stuff. And for the rest of the day, just kind of did my best to care for her. She slept a lot. I called a vet to see if I could bring her in and get her checked out. They were pretty busy that day, and I couldn't bring her in right away. And at this point I thought, well, she's doing kind of okay, so I made an appointment for a little later the next week, figuring she'd just be okay until then. So that was the plan. So for the next couple of days, I was just kind of doing some intensive kitten care, doing my best on my own since the vet didn't have any appointments right then. I kept her eyes clean, made sure she had plenty to eat and drink. Over time, I started discovering that she had a few more problems than I thought she had, so I thought it was just her eyes. Then, once she gained a little bit of her strength back, I noticed she wasn't really putting any weight onto one of her rear legs. So that was another problem going on. Then, a little bit later, I saw this little thing crawling around on her leg, and looked up what it was. I kind of had a hunch. Turns out she had a pretty bad flea infestation. And looking up what those do to kittens, it turns out that a kitten has so little blood that what fleas will suck out of them can actually be very life-threatening for them. So I very quickly figured out how to give a kitten a flea bath. It's not too terribly complicated, and she was still pretty zonked out at this point, so I kind of covered her in dish soap. There's a procedure for this. I had the appropriate sort of dish soap for this, and gave her a bath over her minor protests, the little bit she could. And got a lot of the fleas off. It's a very frustrating process because you never feel like you get all of them. I was just feeling real bad for her at this point, getting all flea bitten, being in a new place she didn't know how to handle, away from her mother, wherever her mother was. I have no idea exactly where she came from. Not able to walk properly, so just feeling real sorry for this kitten, but doing my best to care for her. She seemed real happy after her first bath. I gave her several more after that, but first bath made her a whole lot better, got a lot of the fleas off. Again, the next day I went back to the pet store and got a flea comb and a couple of other supplies that I had missed at first. So I just kind of worked at her fur for the next several days, getting as many fleas out as I could and giving her a few more baths. Around that time, I picked out her name. It kind of felt like I didn't so much pick the name as just sort of realized that that was what her name was all along. So Layla just always felt right to me. That was a name that I always liked, but it just felt like it was her name. So as she gained her strength back over the next few days, I noticed she still wasn't putting any weight on her left hind leg, so that was one of my main concerns then, since I'd dealt with the fleas, and I was sure the vet could take care of her eyes. So I kind of examined her and tried poking her in a few spots, and I couldn't find any places that seemed to cause her any pain, so it wasn't too terribly concerning. She just didn't like to put weight on it. But yeah, I learned what kind of toys she liked. A shoelace turned out to be her favorite toy. And I mostly had her confined to just one room in my house, my second bathroom that I never really used for anything else. That was a good place to keep her contained. Yeah, every day she got a little bit perkier. Was still pretty afraid of a lot of things, including me to some extent. I think she was a wild kitten, but was zonked out enough when I found her that she couldn't really do anything about me handling her, and just kind of got used to the idea of being around me over the time that I had her. So anyway, finally, after what feels like a really long time, the vet visit comes around, and it goes pretty well. The vet couldn't really figure out right away what was wrong with her leg. He agreed that it was a problem, so I decided to keep her there a little longer to get an x-ray, just so that we could see exactly what it was. He told me the medical term for it, and I didn't really catch it, but something was misaligned in her pelvis. It's the kind of injury that often shows up with cats who have been hit by cars, but usually they'd have a lot more damage than she had, so nobody really knows what happened to her. The vet's theory was that it would heal within a month or so. She was too young to be vaccinated. She was about 6 weeks at this point, was his estimate. But she got dewormed and some other basics. They gave her sort of a professional bath there. So she came out very shivery, but again, was happy to be clean afterward. While she was there, she got a prescription for some ointment to use on her eyes. So I had to apply that twice a day to both eyes for 2 weeks. She really hated it, but by the end I got pretty good at doing it quickly so that she didn't have to suffer too much. And as I applied this, her eyes brightened up and opened fully over time, so she was in much better shape after that. And yeah, over the next week or so, I slowly opened up the rest of my house to her, so it didn't keep her just confined to the one room. And she took her time to warm up to it. She was pretty happy with her room for a while. There were some mischief spots I had to watch, a few things I had to cat-proof a little bit better, but eventually she got pretty good at not making too much trouble. My dance machines were one of her favorite hiding places because she could just fit under one. I think she knew I couldn't reach her down there, and still wasn't, 100% comfortable with me. I could get her out if I needed her out of there. And she was, over time warming up to me more and more, and eventually got to the point where she'd actually come up to me and not be afraid. But yeah, she needed some places to hide until she got more comfortable. She was still pretty limpy, but seemed to figure out how to move around with her leg the way that it was. Eventually, she'd be scampering around my house pretty quickly and climbing up her scratching post and everything. If she saw me eating something, she'd always want a sample of it, so she'd just kind of look at me with that look until I gave her just a little bit. So she'd even eat stuff like little bits of banana. I made sure not to give her anything that would give her any problems, but she'd try pretty much whatever I was eating and be happy to eat it. And she really loved to chew and claw on my hands. Not quite as gently as I'd like, but usually she didn't break the skin too much. So I figured she just really needed a playmate, and she's super cute, and I was really bonding with her a lot. She liked me a lot, but eventually I realized that she needed a different environment. So I just decided, it was a really hard decision, but that I just couldn't keep her. Like, it was either I would have to adopt another kitten or another cat to keep her company because I couldn't be her only source of social interaction. And I was realizing just how much time it was taking me to take care of her. I've never had an indoor cat before, so I had to figure out a lot of things to do with her. Anyway, I just decided that she'd do better with somebody who'd have more time for her and would have another cat around for company. On the first vet trip, she just wanted to hide away from everything, but on the second trip, she really just wanted to burrow into my shirt and be close to me. and away from everybody else there. So I felt that bond developing between the two of us. It was real nice. So yeah, very hard decision to give her up. I'm just barely sure that I made the right decision. I do kind of wish I had her back. Anyway, so I put up a Craigslist ad and got 3 responses right away, which was a pleasant surprise. I was expecting it to take a bit. And got real good vibes from the person who ended up adopting her. So yeah, she got adopted 3 weeks after I first picked her up. And hopefully we'll have a better place to live with more people around, other cats, people who will have time for her. So in my final days with her, I spent as much quality time with her as I could and got her to take a little nap on my lap, and that was real nice. She had this really loud purr that, I'm kind of missing right now. So I learned a lot of things from this experience. I've always been a cat person, and a lot of the time in my childhood has had lots of cats around, but they were always outdoor cats, and I was never their sole caretaker. So figuring out how to have an indoor cat that I had complete responsibility for just was a rather different feeling. Like, I was able to do it. It just took a little bit more time and energy than I had for it, is what it turned out. And I figured out this feeling that's sort of been described to me by parents of children. So I had this living thing in my house who I realized depended entirely on me, and if anything would ever happen to me, then something terrible would also happen to her. So, I don't know, it's something that I didn't really understood. I've heard parents say this thing to me about how they don't really care what happens to themselves, but they want to make sure that they're there for their kids. So I understand that feeling now. I've had it firsthand. Every time I'd go driving, I'd kind of be thinking like, well, if I crash right now, what's going to happen to her? Like, that's what I was thinking about. And yeah, then I realized that I don't really worry about things happening to me, but when I have someone else depending on me, it just completely changes the feeling of that. And from another angle, the feeling of having an empty house is very, very different from having one with another creature living in it. I've had people live with me before, I've lived with other people, and I've very much come to prefer complete solitude. Just free reign of my own house. I can do whatever I want without having to consider the needs of another creature who's also living under my roof. So having my solitude back was actually a pretty big relief. I like it too much to give it up for, an entire cat's lifetime. As much as I'd love to have her around, I get a lot of value out of being completely alone here. If this happens again someday, I would be extremely tempted to make the opposite decision and, either if I find 2 kittens, keep them both together, adopt an extra kitten to keep the one company or something. Maybe they wouldn't take as much of my time as if they had each other to keep them company and not be quite so needy as with just one. Anyway. So there wasn't a whole lot of damage from having her there. Cats have claws. They have to be trained to not damage things. But now, the few little claw marks she did put in my chair, I'm just kind of looking at those fondly and thinking, boy, this is when a little kitten wanted to climb up here and just be close to me and be in my lap. So even the little bit of damage that she did, I actually kind of liked it. But yeah, I was really feeling a lot of productivity loss from having her there. It just turns out having a kitten is not in line with my life goals, as much as I liked having her. Anyway, so it was satisfying in itself just to be able to see a little creature beside the road who surely would have died if I hadn't picked her up, and be able to take her in and nurse her back to health, and then give her to someone else who can give her a loving home for the rest of her life. So that was satisfying in its own way. So I was glad to be able to have a taste of being a pet owner, but also glad that I had a way out of it. I'm going to miss you, Layla, but I know you're having a good life somewhere, and I'm happy for that.